So we're at the end of week 2, and again, there's been a lot of really great, lively conversations. So we thank you for that, and encourage you to keep contributing to the conversation. Again, a few key points have come up, and we thought we might address some of them today.
And I'd like to thank as well Sherelle and Jen for distilling out a lot of these comments and putting in so much hard work to sort of try and get a main feel of some of the key issues coming up.
Yeah, great job. Yeah, and so Craig, one of the comments was about whether acceptance means being submissive. Could you say something about that?
Yeah, I think this is a really important issue that comes up in a lot of mindfulness courses. The notion that being accepting means that becoming inert or passive or not responding when a response is needed. And that's not necessarily the mindful view, I suppose, of acceptance. Now, sometimes being mindful, the mindful thing to do is to be at peace with something, even though it's not the way we'd like it to be. It is the way it is. And that could be physical pain, it could sometimes be emotional, emotions we find uncomfortable, or a situation in life we find difficult and not the way that we'd like it to be. But to be able to be accepting of that may be important. But sometimes there is something that needs to be addressed. There is a response that's required, and the very thing that gets in the way of us doing that is feeling afraid or feeling nervous, and when we know we need to respond. And the thing is to actually be accepting of the fact that those thoughts or that trepidation is there, but to recognise in this moment a response is needed, and to accept that perhaps what comes with being able to speak. I can remember examples from my own experience that sometimes it could be an event and you need to speak, and there's fear holding you back. But to be able to be accepting of the fact that, okay, there may be some flack from this, but there is something that needs to be said. And so I think that acceptance, very often people applying it in a mindful way actually find it's an empowering thing rather than a disempowering thing. And so that's a very important issue that's been raised.
Accepting the effort required to make change.
Yeah, the effort that's required, the time, sometimes the challenge that goes with making a change or responding to something. Yeah.
Another key question that came up was how to be mindful in a busy, fast-paced work environment, which obviously many of us face. And when we're being bombarded by a lot of information and need to make decisions quickly and are constantly interrupted. And the question that came up a lot is it possible to actually be mindful in an environment like that? Which I think is a great question, right? Because that is the reality for a lot of us. We just are faced with constant distractions and fast-paced work environments, and of course it's how we show up in those environments. I think that's really the key. Do we allow ourselves to become more and more distracted and to try to multitask and divide our attention? And
I think very often we keep putting our foot flatter and flatter to the boards and the accelerator to try and keep going, when actually we need to learn how to ease off so that internal pressure and that internal stress doesn't build to the point that we start to become very disorganised and chaotic. And that's not always easy.
No, and one of the best ways to do that is just to focus on one thing at a time wherever possible, or to do efficient attention switching. A physician in an emergency department gets interrupted on average 50 times in an hour. And they might be working on the broken arm and the helicopter lands and the head injury comes in, and they have to switch their attention. They have to do that. But then that needs to be the focus of their attention. And in fact, what they were doing before becomes a distraction.
Yes.
So that's one way of working with it. Or just, as you said, slowing down a little bit, taking time, pausing throughout the day, just taking a moment to pause between tasks, relax the body, get back into the moment, then move on to the next thing.
Very often I think that the more we hurry, the more mistakes we make, the less efficient. And this sort of notion of taking that internal pressure down a notch or two, but I won't get anything done. And there's a difference between driving performance with focus and engagement as opposed to driving it with anxiety about the outcome and catastrophising about how much we've got to do before getting out of the office today. And that very often makes us chaotic, takes us over the top of that stress performance curve. Yeah. So there was another particular issue that came up around creativity. And a lot of people really ask about that. If we become more mindful and peaceful or calm or something, does it mean all of a sudden there's this vacuum in our heads and we lose our creativity? When in fact people generally find quite the opposite, that where does the creative process flow from, how to engage that. and how to distinguish between those ideas that come through our mind that are most creative or insightful and those ones that are actually dead ends, as it were. And I think it's a really important and valuable question. Creativity, the ability to do that, is very much a part of our executive functioning, and that sort of aspect of ourselves seems to work better. So, and I think there's this interesting paradox in terms of mind wandering in a distracted, unmindful way, like there's the priority for what we need to get done and the mind's off somewhere else. And this mind engaging with a creative process. And I don't actually think that's mind wandering. And I think there's more research really needed around this area. But when people are really fully and totally engaged in a creative process, yeah, the mind's working, but that's actually being mindful.
There's an awareness that's there, isn't there?
Yeah.
It's an awareness of what the attention's on. So
A conscious, intentional, purposeful engagement with a creative process in the moment. And I wouldn't call that mind wandering in the distracted kind of sense of the word, but mind engaging with a creative process. And I think it's a really interesting point, and there's not a lot of work around that at the moment. And how does mindfulness enhance there is some about problem solving and cognitive rigidity and so on, but how can it help to facilitate that creativity? I've certainly found in my own experience that it does enormously. If I need to sit down and write, to have a little period of time of just to be quiet, to gather myself, good, and then to engage myself with the task in front of me helps me to get on with it in a more efficient way.
Yeah.